Hello, and welcome to Breaking the Wall of Silence. I'm Matt Albright, and I'm humbled to be the director for this important program. Today's forum is a multi-generational panel of Medal of Honor recipients sharing their experience and perspective on several of the key factors surrounding active duty and veteran suicide. This program is presented by the Center for American Values in partnership with the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, two organizations whose mission is to recognize service and sacrifice and inspire the next generation to do the same. The focus of today's forum is to open the conversation and destigmatize talking about active duty and veteran suicide in the military population. We understand this subject can be very traumatic to some of the viewers, so we strongly encourage anybody that may be going through a crisis, especially our veterans or anyone who knows a veteran that may be in crisis, to reach out for help. Throughout the program, we will be sharing the information of the Veteran Crisis Line at the bottom of the screen. Again, you are not alone. So if you're struggling, please reach out for help. Veteran Crisis Line is confidential, and 24 hours a day, there's someone there to talk. Throughout this program, we are going to also talk about other topics concerning veteran suicide. If you have any questions, you can go on the YouTube live chat, put them in. Now, we understand we might not be able to answer all those questions, but we'll do our best to get to them. And we appreciate your passion for this topic. Today, we're proud to be joined by moderator Todd Connor. Todd is a U.S. Navy veteran and the founder of Bunker Labs. Bunker Labs is an organization that helps entrepreneurs in the military community start and grow their business. He's also the lead facilitator at the George W. Bush Institute for Leadership and at the Crane Institute for Leadership. And of course, what would this program be without our recipients? We're proud to be joined by two recipients from different generations, but with a shared passion for our veterans. Our first recipient is a Vietnam veteran, Alan Lynch. Alan often describes himself as not the stereotypical hero you read about in the books. He was bullied as a youth, and that bullying led him to join the Army in 1964. By 1967, he found himself with the 12th Cavalry in Vietnam. In December of that year, the 12th Cav was ambushed. During that ambush, 3 of the fellow soldiers that were with Alan were wounded. Alan selflessly ran into a hail of gunfire, protecting these gentlemen, and for hours, wave after wave of enemy attacked, and Alan single-handedly fended off this enemy and protected these gentlemen. For this heroic action, Alan was awarded the Medal of Honor. But Alan's interest in saving veterans didn't stop there. After he retired or got out of the service, he started working with the VA, where he was an advocate for disabled veterans and worked directly with some of the high populations we work with today, some of these at-risk gentlemen. Of course, our next recipient is Florent Flo Groberg. Flo was born in France and moved to the United States at age 11. He was an athlete, attending University of Maryland, when the attacks on 9/11 shook him to the core. He was so inspired to serve that he nearly quit college, until his father encouraged him to stay in and finish what he had started. But his passion to serve our country didn't end there, because when he completed school, he joined the Army and became a Ranger. He first deployed in 2008, where he experienced over 250 encounters with the enemy. He redeployed in 2012, this time on a security envoy. On a fateful day that year, he was escorting a group of coalition and Afghan leaders, along with several high-ranking military members from the United States Army. Flo noticed a suspicious individual standing near the group. When he approached this gentleman, he realized it was a suicide bomber. Flo selflessly and immediately grabbed this gentleman and pushed him away when the blast exploded. Sadly, lives were lost that day, but Flo's selfless action saved many of those lives. We are extremely proud to have these gentlemen talk about this subject. We know that nobody here might be an expert on this, but all of us are truly passionate about helping our fellow Americans, especially our service members, through these trauma. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Todd Connor.
Thank you, Matt, for that introduction. And it's such a privilege to be hosting this conversation, moderating this conversation with two people that I admire and am proud to call friends, Al Lynch and Flo Groberg. Thanks for the opportunity, Matt, and to the Center for American Values and the Congressional Medal of Honor Society for jointly organizing this program. It's a conversation that's an important one to have, and I'm honored to be playing a small part in it. So gentlemen, I'm going to lead us into the conversation and invite you to take yourselves off mute. And, you know, I wanted to get us started by sort of reflecting on you as Medal of Honor recipients. I know that you are each asked to represent a range of topics to engage the public, and in order to advance the lives of military veterans and their families, people look to you for leadership and for, frankly, to be spokespeople for issues that are relevant and that matter. And we will talk about suicide awareness and prevention, but I want to start, we'd be missing an opportunity if we didn't start with a question on leadership, which is, as a Medal of Honor recipient, how you have assumed this role. Some have talked about the quote weight of the medal for both the honor, but also the obligation and responsibility that it assumes for yourself and for your life. And you have both assumed that role with great tenacity, carry that weight. I'd love to hear your perspectives about how you have constructed your role as a leader in our country amidst the range of questions that you get asked and the opportunities that you have and the obligations that you hold. How have you thought about your role as a leader and as a spokesperson for the military community? Flo, if I can start with you, then we'll go to Al.
First of all, Matt, thanks for that incredible introduction. You're on point. Todd, it's always a pleasure working with you and specifically sharing, the screen with you. And I'm just deeply honored that I get to also deal with my good friend Alan, who's a great role model for the younger generation and for my generation specifically, that we get an opportunity to follow in their footsteps. I think for me, it's simple. It's about staying humble. I look at the medal. I look at myself as a courier of the medal, representing our nation, because it is part of who we are in essence as Americans. And it's just like wearing a uniform. You have to have the integrity and the responsibility and the mindset that you're going to go out there and honor your uniform and those who you serve with every single day, and then you're not going to allow complacency to kick in or take advantage of it. So I look at the medal as a platform to represent my country, but most importantly to represent the four individuals, Commander Sergeant Griffin, Major Gray, Major Kennedy, and Reggae, who didn't come home after what happened on August 8, 2012. And the President Obama put the medal around my neck and used the words of hero, and that always felt uncomfortable. Specifically because of those guys who didn't come home, but most importantly, because I felt like that day was the worst day of my life. And I can't ever look at it as a way of justifying any type of award. Instead, I see it now as a responsibility to make sure that because of the platform that it does provide, that I take advantage of it in a sense of bringing some good into the community, our veteran community. And whether it's suicide prevention, whether it's mental health, whether it's talking about injuries, or veterans transitioning. You and I did a lot of work together, us supporting when I was at Boeing, supporting bunker labs, because it's game changing the way you're changing lives by providing these entrepreneurs the opportunity to really succeed and know that they can succeed in our industries. So I'm using the medal as a way to serve, right? And I'm hopeful that in the end, when it's all said and done, that I would have represented my nation in a medal and every individual that's associated with this specific medal around my neck with honor.
Thanks, Will. Alan, your thoughts?
I think when I first got the medal, I wish I could credit the recipient that told me this, because I think it's one of the most important things a recipient can learn, and that is that earning the medal is the easy part. Wearing it, that's a little bit more hard, because it's a lifelong thing if you do it right. Many times in my life, I didn't do it right. I was a young kid. I was back from Vietnam. it was the 60s, it was the 70s, you know. But the older I got, the more I realized that this wasn't about me. This was about all of the people that we lost in Vietnam, all of my friends that, you know, had their lives wrecked because of Vietnam. And then as we went into, you know, the different wars, the, you know, Gulf War and then the War on Terror, it became even more of a responsibility, because there were, when I got the medal, there were like almost 600 recipients. Now there's what, 67 of us around there. So the weight of responsibility has increased as our numbers have decreased. I think it's very important. This is the best. This represents the best of the armed forces, and we have to carry this properly to do the job right. It's a lifelong assignment.
A lifelong assignment. I appreciate that, Al, and certainly, you know, can just attest to the role that both of you have fulfilled with that humility and with that sense of obligation. I want to ask a question, sort of staying in the theme of leadership, which is, you know, both of you have had the opportunity to speak to hundreds, if not thousands of people, including in forums like this, who are eager to hear your own personal story of heroism that Matt shared sort of the highlights of, but also eager, you know, I think to understand the fabric of this nation. What are your, you know, and we can acknowledge too that our country's at a fractured place, and we're coming through a global pandemic, and, you know, the challenges are real. Alan, you've got obviously some more lived experience than myself and others. What have your travels and conversations with Americans everywhere taught you about the nature of this country, the men and women who serve in particular, and maybe even just this question of what is it that makes this country special? I'd love to hear your reflections on kind of where you're at, if you're an optimist, why you're an optimist, and what makes this country of ours that we love special.
Well, for me, it was my time in the military. I was a white kid from a white neighborhood. This was back when they still had, you know, colored and white drinking fountains in Georgia, and to be in a World War II barracks, and for a lot of the younger veterans, they have no idea of the experience of being in a World War II barracks where everything was done communally. There were no dividers between the commodes and all of this. And I learned to work with all kinds of different people. You know, I was a very sheltered kid other than being bullied, and to be in a barracks with white people, black people, Hispanics, kids with college degrees and kids that only had sophomore year in high school, and to learn to work together. And I think that's the thing that makes this country great, is the fact that we have a military that is civilian led, and it's a military where we all learn how to get along. And everyone that goes through basic training knows if the drill sergeant ain't happy, ain't nobody going to be happy. So if we can tap into that veteran population, as our younger veterans are doing quite well at, I think we've got a good chance. We just got to get rid of the silliness.
Flo, what would you say? What's your assessment?
You know, I agree 100% with Alan in regards to the uniqueness in the military, is that you can take people from all sorts of background, different colors, different religious preferences, sexual preferences, educational backgrounds, and put them all, you know, in the same uniform. And in the end, they're going to love each other and be willing to die for each other. It's the most unbelievable setting you could ever experience in a lifetime. And so there's a lot to learn from that. What I found interesting is how divided our country has been recently. And then a guy like me, I can go, well, to Boston, Massachusetts. I can go to, you know, LA or any other places like San Diego, to Alabama or Lubbock, Texas. And no one cares that, you know, I was born in France. No one cares that my middle name is Ahmed. No one cares of the way I look. They just care that, hey, like, this dude served his country, and appreciate that. So in the end, there's still at the core this whole America, you know, mindset of like, if you're willing to fight for this country, I don't really care where you come from. Unfortunately, I think that today's settings in terms of social media, in terms of the information dissemination across, and some of the rhetorics that are happening sort of blind us. But if you close the door and you take that all away and you put us all in a room together, we can have a very intelligent and conversation that's going to lead somewhere where we have common ground. I will always say this: we are really good at fighting internally. and calling ourselves names at times and being angry with each other. But the day that an external factor comes in and tries to destroy our way of life and our freedoms, it doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, Green Party, whatever color you are, there is no one that will be able to destroy our foundation, our core, except us. And so we need to be cognizant of it. I have never been in my life more nervous about our foundation than I am today, because we are our own worst enemy, just like suicide and mental health. And that's one thing that is really important for us to have that direct conversation, because we can fix it, but it's going to take us to take that step forward. But I believe we will. I'm an optimist in that sense.
Mm-hmm. And here's the thing.
Yeah,
when you're in combat, you don't ask what political party, what color, what race. You don't ask any of those questions. If your buddy's wounded, you don't go out and check his ID. You don't look him up on the computer, check his ID, make sure that he's the right kind of person. You go out, you get him. I saw white guys rescuing black guys rescuing, on and on. It doesn't matter in combat. Why does it matter here where we got, more than we can count? We're rich.
I appreciate this, and we could have and should have more conversations about these experiences, these touchstone experiences from the military that teach us, as you said, Alan, we can do this. We've done this in our lives, and I think there's a lot that the military community can teach our society at large about how to live together and be together. Flo, you touched on this. We'll turn our attention to the headline of today's conversation, which is suicide awareness. And the battle that we face, sometimes internally, sometimes in the company of others. Dr. Philip Smith, and I want to credit Dwayne France for providing a lot of this thought leadership. Dwayne is the Director of Family Services at the Family Care Center and is Executive Director of the Colorado Veterans Health and Wellness Agency, and is a real leader in the field of veteran mental health. But he shared some resources. Dr. Philip Smith of the University of South Alabama says that suicide is both common and rare. It's rare in the sense that we may go several years without experiencing a personal loss to suicide, but it's common in that just about everyone has lost someone they care about to suicide. Many service members and veterans have a brother or a sister that they serve with who they have lost to suicide. And for many, that number is greater than the number that was lost in any other way, including combat. There are anywhere from, one study says, 115 to 130 people that are impacted by a single death by suicide. The image's impacts can be greater or lesser depending on the level of connection someone has to the deceased. But those are big numbers. As survivors of suicide loss, sharing personal stories, we know can be a helpful way to educate others while also supporting those with the same experiences. The first question I have for each of you is do you have any personal connection to this issue of suicide? Just to begin to frame the conversation. Flo, can I start with you?
Yeah, I mean, I went through it with my own self, right? Where I was thinking about committing suicide when I was in the hospital. I was influenced by I guess I would call them my internal demons, but also by the drugs that I was getting at Walter Reed to deal with my injuries. I'm limb salvage. I lost a piece of my left leg from the bomb. And so when I was sitting in the hospital for 5 months, inpatient, 4 to 5 months inpatient, I was, really beating myself down with survivor's guilt, trying to replay the scenario over and over again. And then you add, oxys, ketamine, Dilaudid, and all sorts of different drugs into your system. Those demons became very, very much unbeatable. And so I remember I said that a couple of months after I started my recovery, I remember saying this, no Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Chechens, anyone that I've ever fought against, it was as strong as my own internal demons. But I would say the first time I've ever experienced, the reality of suicide is when Cal Lewis killed himself. And in April of 2011, and I was the acting company commander, and I just had a conversation with him probably the day prior. I was supposed to be training that following Monday for air assault school, and I get that call early on in the morning and to go to his house. And I saw, I didn't see his body, but I read his letter. He was obviously influenced with pills at the time, and he had just gone through a situation where he felt like he just couldn't get out of it, and the consequences were too high for him to continue on living. But he made an emotional decision that obviously cost him everything, and so that was tough for us. He was one of our leaders. He was a great NCO, non-commissioned officer, and it was one of those moments where you ask yourself, how? Type A type of guy, how could he do that? And then you realize that's because he was a type A type of guy, and he just got himself in a position where instead of being able to share it, he just took it all in, and unfortunately the outcome was the worst possible outcome, which was him taking his life.
Thanks for that story. Alan, any stories that connect you to this conversation?
Oh yeah, two. My brother-in-law killed himself. His were a little bit different circumstances than we normally read about, but he's still considered one of that 22. He had pancreatic cancer and was getting treatment by the VA, and they were jacking him around. And he had a home health care visit, and he was in excruciating pain, and nothing helped. And the home health care nurse came in, and one of his friends were there, doing what friends do. And she told us later, after he had killed himself, that the home health care nurse was just horrible in her attitude towards him. And he called everybody. He called all of his friends. He called my wife and told her he loved her. And he never said anything about killing himself, but he had been going through these changes, and then he did it. And we went and drove to Las Vegas where he was living and took care of everything. One of my very best friends, and I need to tell this story because this is how that one little pause between thought and action really is important. Mark is it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny. When we do schools, he asks the kids, do any of you know a rocket scientist? And they all, of course, go, no. And he says, you do now. Mark got his PhD in computer programming back in the day when, computers were a whole lot different than we have now. Great guy, was working for IBM, had done work with NASA as a contractor, and developed post-traumatic stress. He was a tunnel rat in Vietnam. And he always had essential tremors. The PTSD brought it up really bad to the point that he couldn't hold a cup of coffee. He was shaking so bad. And one day, unbeknownst to any of us, because he never called us, he decided he had enough. And to show you the kind of guy he was, he went out and he laid a tarp out in his backyard, and because he didn't want to make a mess for anyone to clean up. That's just the kind of guy he is. And he said, I had the gun to my head, and I happened to see Katie, which is his dog. He has a service dog for the tremors. And he said, it was that fast. Who's going to take care of my dog? And he put the gun down. So I find out that he did this because he had to get into the hospital, not for any PTSD that he dealt with himself at that time, but he almost had a heart attack at one of our golf outings for a foundation. Didn't bother to tell anybody the whole bleeding day. So I stopped to see him on my way back from an event up at Madison, and I see he has a 24-hour nurse. And I says, what do you got a nurse for like this? You look fine to me. He says, well, when I got admitted, I made the mistake of telling him I was going to take my life a few days ago, almost like a week ago. And they decided that I needed a 24-hour nurse. So he gave all of his guns. He willingly gave all of his guns, of which he had a few, to his brother, who keeps them for him. And he made a promise to all of his friends, myself included, that he would not, again, do something like that. He's as good as his word.
We are sharing the number for suicide veterans in crisis hotline. So to the extent anyone needs that resource, I think it's showing in the bottom third of the screen. It's a resource that we should have and share with those that may be needing it. Al, thanks for sharing that story. Something that we know is important as a protective gear against suicide is connectedness, which can exist, Al, in your story, even with a service animal, right? Just this connectedness to something that is relying on you. This need for connectedness is supported by research from the CDC's suicide prevention technical package, as well as the VA's national strategy to prevent veteran suicide. One contributing factor to suicide, according to Dr. Thomas Joyner's interpersonal theory of suicide, is a sense of isolation and a disconnectedness from others. When someone does not feel as though they are integrated into a social group, they feel a low sense of belonging and a sense of alienation. Research indicates that suicide rates go down during times of celebration as well as during times of hardship or tragedy, both of which make people feel more connected to others around them, which is interesting, both celebration as well as times of hardship or tragedy. The sense of connectedness is really critical for veterans and their families, where having previously been connected to a highly integrated social and professional group, leaving that group can make the sense of social isolation even greater. I know that's an experience that a lot of military veterans can relate to. Conversely, the presence of strong relationships has been shown to reduce the likelihood of suicide attempts. And so if a veteran or family member feels as though they have someone that they can reach out to and talk to without fear of judgment or shame, then the service member or veteran has a better chance of coping with whatever their current life stressors are. The question is this, connectedness can mean different things to different veterans. And encouraging veterans to engage in community events that are engaging them is a strategy to reduce suicide. But how do we do it? Building strong and trusting relationships, if that is a protective factor, how do we do that as a policy framework, as a community? How do we make sure that people are connected if we believe that that really is a key tool here? Flo, start with you.
I think you have a conversation like we're doing right now. The problem is we're all connected, and it's about around you, hopefully having the consciousness to be able to see that if a person is starting to disconnect, that there's potentially something happening, but not obviously for it, or but now. And then it's about listening. To me, it's what really works. Like when I was going through my situation, I didn't believe. One, I was in denial internally of my own situation. Second, I didn't feel like anyone would understand. Third, I thought I could beat it. And fourth, I didn't want to bother people with it. So, you go through all these situations and you internally at different stages where you don't want to be a nuisance to other folks around you. But then Travis Mills walked into my room and he had heard that I was pissed off. He had no idea. No one really knew actually about what was going on. If not, they probably would have put me on the fourth floor at Walter Reed. But instead, he came in and he had heard that I was angry and feeling sorry for myself and my injuries. And he's a quadruple amputee. And he just came in with a smile on his face and reminded me that, we're alive and we're breathing and we have an opportunity to honor our friends who didn't come home, and that I still had a purpose, and that, I still had a responsibility to go and honor the duty. And so based off that conversation, we chatted 15 minutes, but he opened up a pathway and sort of a light for me to drive on and see that, okay, so I'm still worthwhile. I still have people can still depend on me for something. And it allowed me to start opening up. But I still went through it pretty difficult time. Part of it was because I couldn't sleep and things like that, but with PTS. But it really, when my wife came into my life, it was the first time I slept in 2 years. And then when I started talking after receiving the medal, it really became therapeutic. So it's important to stay connected. But the hard part about it is understanding when a person is disconnected. And that is, none of my friends knew. you can fake it too in a setting, and you would have no idea. And then that's when the shocking part comes, like, wow, he took his life, or she took her life. I had no idea. We're just hanging out. But that's because at times we hide it, and because we're either ashamed of it, or we truly believe that we can beat it ourselves because we're that type of personality. So I would say the challenge is for people around us, our friends, our family, to pay just a little bit more closer attention. And then any type of warning signs, to go out there and have a conversation without accusing anyone of anything. And then I'll leave it with this, like I started with, like, what we're doing, eliminating the stigma that having these thoughts is bad, and that you're weak. Or that you shouldn't be having it, or because you have a tiny heart syndrome, things that we used to call ourselves back in the day. To be open to talk about that, the reality that hurting is okay. It means you're alive. It also means that you probably need to get a little help, and you shouldn't be ashamed of that. Instead, you should embrace it. It's an injury, and you can recover from it.
We're going to talk about stigma next. I'll ask you on this question of connectedness. How do we keep folks connected? Or as Flo mentioned, how do we begin to know when folks are choosing disconnection as maybe a symptom or a warning?
Well, there's a couple of things. First off, it's important who you're connected with. When I was really having struggles and, the going through the roller coaster ride that is PTSD, and I'm sorry, I'm old, so PTSD is what it is for me.
It's a multi-generational panel. That's why we said so.
Yes. Yeah. So it was a roller coaster ride. I mean, there would be times where I was great, and then I would be suicidal, and I had plans, and the things that stopped me were I was scared that my kids would know I did it. And so I tried figuring out ways to have an accident. Then I could just, see myself hitting the, brick retaining wall and, ended up paralyzed instead of dead. So, a lot of those kind of thoughts go through. And then I started hanging out with other Vietnam vets, but they weren't good. They were great friends, but they weren't good for me because we had wonderful pity parties and we were drinking and we were in that, life sucks. Yeah, life sucks. Let's have another beer. And you get into this vicious cycle. And it was very hard to break out of that. So it's important that when you connect with people, you connect with positive people that are really working on getting well. I call it fighting the dragon. You're never going to beat it, but you can kick the crap out of it if you have the right tools. I went into therapy twice. Once was in the late 70s, and that was only because I almost punched out my boss. My fist was in the air. Had he not smiled, I'd have decked him. That smile saved me from going to jail. I quit my job, I walked away, and the blue ribbon got me back working with the VA. I had to go in and apologize. The second time, I just got sick and tired of being sick and tired all the time. I got tired of riding the roller coaster, and I got tired of every time Christmas came, I hated it. I hated the holidays. And so I started seeing Betsy, one of the vet centers. And she wanted to put me on medication, and having worked with the VA in the 70s, that was a no deal. So I told her that I would do whatever she said. I put myself completely in her hands, and I worked my ass off. It ended up with me finding my buddy's grave. He was killed by friendly fire. And he lived in Shullsburg, Wisconsin. So I had to go out to Shullsburg, which is about 4 hours away, find his grave. I had to film it, and then I had to share it with my kids. It was kind of something old, something new kind of thing. It was so cathartic. I shared with them, finding his tombstone and all of that. I have had marvelous Christmases and holiday seasons since. It was like the veil was lifted. The other thing, and I got to recommend this because it has kind of changed my life, and it's really changed my son's life, is there's probably one of the best podcasts you're ever going to find. If you're wanting to struggle, if you're having some struggles, it's called The Art of Manliness. And they have cohorts. And my son, who had gone through a divorce, his first wife died, then he went through a divorce. He was having some rough times. He started listening to it, and he joined one of the cohorts, which is Strenuous Life. In fact, he wears a bracelet that says do hard things. He's now rucking with a 50-pound pack. He's on these challenges where he rucks, weekly and monthly. In fact, I took him deer hunting, and it was the first time he fired a rifle, the first time he killed a deer, and the first time he gutted it. And I said, you know what this gives you? And I was thinking props against his brother. And he said, no, I get a badge. And it's that kind of thing that he's involved in that's very positive. And I find rucking myself, and I got a bad back, but I carry 10 pounds. Sometimes I try to go to 15, but we got to do physical stuff. And that's what my shrink told me was, I got to be physical. I got to walk in the woods. I got to get out, do things.
I so appreciate you sharing that, Alan. And we will share in the chat, if we can do this, the Art of Manliness, and check that out as a resource. And so both of you acknowledge sort of intervention moments and getting support and resources for you to move past those points in your own life. Flo, you brought this up. Dr. Edgar Villarreal is watching live now, and he's with the VA Eastern Colorado Healthcare System, part of their suicide prevention program. And he's asking a question about stigma. What would you say to those in our community that struggle to seek support due to the stigma that exists around mental health and suicide? And obviously, there's been a lot of conversation around this. It's, I presume, a better picture today than it was after Vietnam, but still, there's work to be done. How do we address the stigma around mental health?
Well, you talk about it at the highest of levels. You have people stepping up and have that conversation and share stories. I think, Alan brought it up and you brought it up. It's about sharing stories. It's about hearing some potential idols of yours, right? Who have gone through some really difficult times, and you kind of realize, like, oh my gosh, like, really, that person went through it or is going through this. I had no idea. And you break that stigma of, well, only a certain type of people can potentially go through this. Or if you're suicidal, you have a tiny heart syndrome. I'm a hypocrite, right? When I was in Afghanistan, my second tour, I put one of my sergeants in Tar Guard for the last 4 months because he had a breakdown right before patrol. And all I could think about at that moment was like, man, this guy's broke, tiny heart syndrome, he's weak, and then I can't trust him. To an extent, I mean, he was struggling, and it was a good decision not to put him on a patrol. But I could have done so much more for him. And so you fast forward, a couple of years later, actually, this was in 2009. You fast forward a couple of years later, and here I am sitting in my hospital bed, and I'm going through my own struggles and start realizing, like, it doesn't matter if you're Ranger qualified, Division I athlete, you can bench, those guys that can bench 400 pounds, whatever it is. The brain is a muscle, and it can get injured. And when it is injured, you need to go. You need to be open and accept recovery measures. And to do so, you probably need to talk to someone that's a professional, and you probably need to be able to, open up on what your symptoms are. You'd be incredibly surprised at how many people have gone through similar things. Everyone's got his injuries are unique, but people have gone through similar things, and then, share it. The greatest things that ever happened for me is being able to allow my feelings to be, out there. And so that weight that I carried inside wasn't there anymore. And I did not realize how many of my friends had gone through similar things. I did not realize how many people were going through these things at that specific moment. And they came to me and they're like, so can I talk to you about what I'm going through? Because I can't believe you went through this and that you're so open about it. And then they share it. It becomes this opportunity to really take the monkey off your back. It needs to be from everyone. We are doing it today. There are, individuals who have these platforms that need to be able to open up and share their struggles. And that hopefully that allows others to see that, you're not unique in a sense of like no one feels that way and you're a bad person for it or you're weak. Instead, you're a human being, and it's okay to be in pain. It's okay to be scared, because that is what we do as human beings. It's mostly okay to share, because you're going to find people that will listen first and then guide you in the right direction. But that's my non-professional, recommendation and advice. It's worked for me so far.
Yeah. Al, what would you say on how do we remove the stigma? You've seen this over the course of a few decades in your own life. How do we get folks to get the help they need?
I think first of all, we have to realize it's not about us. I mean, it's great to put on the big macho, beat your chest and, I can tough my way through it. But we have mothers and fathers and spouses, children. We need to focus on them. What is good for them? And, it's like, it was like with me. Do I want my kids growing up going, my dad killed himself? Do I want them to have that stigma? Do I want my wife to go through, well, my husband killed himself? Evidently, I may have done something wrong, or worse yet, the kids saying the same thing. What did I do? So it's not about us. We have to get past this idea that it's all about me. That's how I started to heal with the PTSD. Was it's not about me. It's not about my trauma. My trauma diminishes when I'm helping other people. So you got to get help. If none of us can handle it ourselves, I don't think. It just sneaks up on you and it gets you at the worst possible time. That's what happened with me the last since 1973 when I had my first real bad episode. So it's kind of like we have to treat it like it's our enemy. It's out to kill us. It's out to take our life, and we can't let it win. Not only that, but we have a duty to live the lives that our brothers and sisters could never live. That's why it's important to get help. They would love to have the life we have now. So we have to get help. And if it takes going to therapy, then you do that. If it takes quitting drinking, then you do that. The one thing that we don't understand is not every veteran suicide is counted. When I was with the VA many years ago, we did a thing where the eggheads in Washington decided that they didn't want to have people institutionalized. And so they just discharged people that had been there for 20 years. We had people kissing trains, getting drunk and walking in front of a semi. None were counted as suicides. Today, we have veterans that are overdosing, having accidents, drinking themselves to death. So just because, you don't fit that role of I'm suicidal, are you doing drugs? Are you doing alcohol? If you are, then you need help. And there's plenty of help available. Just get it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If I can jump in, Todd and Alan, I want to put a little spin on what you talked about in regards to the, it's not about you and the trauma. And I think it's really important to also highlight something, and this has been a big deal, is that I know of an individual that, killed himself because of that mindset where he felt like he couldn't fail his family. But in the end, he realized, well, that pain of trying to do it for them is even bigger. And that added on even more stress. And he just figured that he was even hurting them even more. So I agree with that to the extent, but I also want to make sure that, when we recommend, and again, everything else is just, this is us having a conversation, right? We're not saying put a different type of pressure and stressor on top of yourselves, right? It's more,
absolutely.
Yeah, it's more about recognizing that, these people around you, they want to help and they love you and they want to be there. And what's going to be hard for them is not understanding they had an opportunity at some point to be there to support you. So instead of even just going out there and trying to deal with your demons and battling your demons just for them, have a conversation with them, because they're going to save your life. And that's the beauty of family. That's the beauty of friendship. That's the beauty of just being able to share a little bit of that pain and let it just dissipate out of you. So that to me is very important, because I agree. Just like serving, and it's easy for us to go serve, put on a uniform. I volunteered. A lot of in your generation, Alan, didn't even get the opportunity to volunteer. They were voluntold. They were forced to do it and to go into the setting you were in. But we used to always say, like, I didn't want to come home. It was okay if I came home in a body bag. I didn't want to come home without my hands or my legs or blind. But our families would have to live with that for the rest of their lives. And that's the part that really breaks your heart. So
I think that's one of the things that, you have to fix yourself. That has to take a priority. But, I've seen so much. And here's the thing, and I'll just give you a quick what happened. My dad developed lung cancer in 1993, and he got really sick. And so we were taking care of him. And, my mom and my dad were in great need. And the more I concentrated on my mom and dad, the less my symptoms were. And after my dad passed away, after a very tough year, we were all focused on Mom. And about a year and a half later, my mother had a massive stroke. And I was concentrating on going out and visiting her, because she was totally gone. I mean, she was alive, but the body was gone, the brain was gone. She was just there. And I would go out every weekend as much as I could. And I was totally focused on that. And what I realized afterwards was that the more I was concentrating on her, the better I felt emotionally in myself. And I was going right back into some negative symptoms. And I was like, I went out to the woods. This is where I always find peace. I went out to the woods and I was walking and I was thinking water. And I realized that when I was in my, not a fake kind of, hey buddy, I really care about you, but in my heart, concentrating on helping others, I felt better. Yeah. And I started with my wife and my kids. And then I started, with veterans, and I'm 75 years old. I'm still doing stuff, but it's because I care, and I don't feel the pressure to be what I'm not. I'm comfortable with who I am, but it's a two-way street, I guess. But we got to fix ourselves. I can't help you if I can't help save you if I'm drowning.
Yeah, that theme of service to others is so core to our humanity and our well-being, and it's innate when we're in uniform that you have that kind of shared concern for others, and we have to in some ways find that after service, and I so relate to that. We have a comment from Carrie Bolter, who's a mental health clinician with the El Paso County, Colorado Sheriff's Department. She just wants to say thank you for sharing your stories, because by doing that, you're helping to destigmatize getting help and asking for help. So she offers that. We have a question from Michael Hartford with the Marcus Institute for Brain Health and the Gary Sinise Avalon Network. And he's asking about invisible wounds. TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, and mental health disorders. These are considered signature wounds for the post 9/11 combat veterans, arguably existed pre 9/11 as well, although without much of a language around it or understanding. And he's asking, what are your thoughts and experiences, regardless of what era, to sort of the relationship between veteran suicides and invisible wounds? You guys have spoken about this, but broadening the aperture of health and wounds that we can't see.
There's a friend of mine, Jim Mukoyama, was my battalion commander when I was in the reserves. One of the great people that I've had the privilege of knowing. Phenomenal leader. And he came up with something several years ago that he's working on now, and it's called the moral injury. We're taught not to kill, and yet we're put in a combat situation where we have to do just that, and we have to make instantaneous decisions. So along with post-traumatic stress, you have the moral injury of dealing with, the guilt of what you had to do in combat, and the what you should have done but didn't do, and what you did do but shouldn't have done, kind of thing going on. So there's a lot of difference, not only the traumatic brain injury, but also that moral injury, and all of those need to be addressed. And they're all just a little bit, the TBI is certainly a traumatic injury to the brain, but the PTSD and the moral injury, well, they're the same, but they're so different.
Yeah, that the moral injury and the conversation around that. Flo, how do you think about these different?
Yeah, I had a traumatic brain injury from the blast, and so it would freak me out because for 6 weeks they would come in and show me these cars of these animals, like a giraffe, and I knew what it was, but I just couldn't remember the name. I couldn't do simple math. I'm a math guy, so that really freaked me out. How many quarters in a dollar? That was very difficult for me to do. Follow simple instructions. When I was in the wheelchair, they tell me, here, make a left out of your room, go down the hall, make the third right, and then knock on the second door, and I'd make a left and go down the hall, and I'd forget what right I was supposed to make. So that was really, really frustrating because you're realizing that the most important part of your body is not functioning right. And if that doesn't function right, nothing else is going to function. And so that became a very intense early on, the first 6 weeks at the hospital. And then one day they came in the cars. I was like, that's a giraffe. And they're like, well, you're healing. It's like, thank the Lord, right? I appreciate that. But the moral piece too plays such an important role. That's probably one of the biggest, wounds that we need to deal with. And again, it goes back to being able to share. I never lost a second of sleep for the things I had to do in Afghanistan and combat. I lost a lot of sleep for my friends who didn't come home, and trying to figure out ways that we could have been better and change the outcome of that specific decisive day. But I also have lost sleep and seen things, on what happened with civilians, and that's the horror of war. And I think that when I understood the enemy, and I actually respected my enemy, and so I understood the ground game is that he is trying to kill me, and I am trying to kill him, and that is every day that was the duty. What I never could truly understand, though I understand the settings, is death with civilians and kids and stuff, and that really shook me to my core. And I think those are the very very sensitive wounds that I've carried around in my life. And I'll tell you, I can picture right now 2 little girls in 2010 in the Kunar province of Afghanistan, right outside of combat outpost Maine, and they were getting out of school in short mortar. We were ambushed. Well, the boss was ambushed, and we went as quick reaction force, and one of our mortar team shot a mortar, and the base plate came off, and it came short, and it killed 2 girls. And I had to go identify the bodies and take pictures, and talk to the elders in that village, and start bringing them back to our boss for conversation and apologizing, of course. That is probably the most grotesque image that I will always carry with me for the rest of my life. And that is a wound. And you start adding more and more on top of those, that becomes a very dangerous setting. So it's therapeutic that I get to share that with you today. I'm open about it, and I understand that there was the consequences of the environment that I was in, which was war. And war is ugly, right? Everybody, trust me, I'm not a proponent. I'm not an advocate for war. I would say avoid it as every time if you can. But it's also a reality of the setting that we were in. So I agree. I still think for me, it's the same thing, same solution. One, don't be afraid to talk about it, share. Hopefully you have people that are willing to listen and not judge you. But in the end, you got to do the same thing too. You got to be willing to listen to others and see what they have to say, because whatever they're sharing could really change the course of your life.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing that, Flo, and that openness. I think it's safe to say that there's so much that we're still learning about brain health, and there's massive investments being made, and I think that it's going to be a lot more sophistication in time to come about how our brains work and how we treat our brains. We're getting to time. I do want to ask this question because it's relevant to the conversation. It's maybe a sensitive one. I don't know if it's sensitive or not, but it's something that you acknowledge, Alan, and it's firearms kind of in the context of all this. According to the Department of Veterans Affairs, nearly 7 out of 10 veteran deaths by suicide are the result of firearm injuries. And nationally, about half of all suicides are by firearm. And so how do we talk about firearms and the use of firearms, which again, because of its finality as an instrument in a suicidal kind of moment impulse, the stakes are really high. 85% of suicide attempts with a firearm are fatal and successful in that sense. How do we have the conversation about firearms and firearm safety in the military community, given its relationship to suicide?
In one sense, I think it's a matter of personal responsibility. When I feel years ago, when I had a few guns, when I was into that place where I was contemplating things, I locked my gun cabinet. I put the keys somewhere that was very difficult to get. I literally had to climb up and get them. I took the ammunition, I put them someplace else. I kept it all separate. I think what my buddy Mark did, hey, brother, take my guns until feel like I can have them again. I mean, we have to be responsible for ourselves. We have to be responsible to our spouse, our parent, whoever we're living with, our partners, and that's part of that job. The other thing is if you're a good friend, it's kind of like, I think it's one of those platonic arguments, are you going to be the friend that's going to take your buddy's gun and have him maybe hate your guts? Are you going to be that kind of a good friend? And I think that's the kind of friends we have to have. That's the kind of friends I want. But if I get into a point where I'm in that kind of a ditch, I want someone to love me enough to smack me in the mouth and take my guns.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't agree more. I think guns specifically are an instrument. You remove guns, if a person really wants to kill themselves, there are multiple ways to kill yourself, unfortunately. You do pills, you can get a knife, you can do whatever. I don't even want to say the things, but so in the end, it goes back to helping that person. And I listen, I have firearms in my home. I support firearms, but I'm your biggest proponent and advocate to support mental health and recovery, PTSD, the invisible wounds, because that to me is what we need to solve. And I just personally cannot associate an excuse almost, right, behind that topic. I do recognize it. And I think, Alan brought up some really good ways to deal with it. And if that's the case, you remove the instruments that potentially can cause harm, right? But you got to also go out there and put all the resources on deck to support that person so that we get healthy.
Yeah. Gentlemen, I so appreciate again just how you've showed up for this conversation and the honesty that you've sort of brought forward. Last question is this, which is, what's your charge to the folks that are listening in? I mean, people look to you for the medal that you wear and carry for leadership, but what's the role that you would give everyone else to play in this conversation from wherever they're at, whether they're just, active duty, sitting on the sidelines, working in mental health? What's your charge for everyone that might be listening? Flo, let's start with you if we can.
You have an ability to save that person in front of you that is struggling. You don't have to wear a Medal of Honor. You don't have to have a PhD. You don't have to have any of that. All you need to do is be a caring, compassionate individual that is willing to listen and willing to go out there, walk the walk with that person through their recovery or through their journey. That's it. Be open-minded about it. Don't judge. be there for them. That is, there's 68 Medal of Honor recipients, right? The most important person in the world is Carson, my wife, right? That is every single day when I wake up around me. I need, she listens to me. I do the same with her. Be in your environment, be open to listening, open up your eyes, and then walk the walk to support those individuals that need the help. And then lastly, be open with yourself when you're struggling. I no more of this. It's okay. I'm not that person, or like, I'll get through it. Because you're going to add another day on top of that, another one, and that becomes stronger and stronger. What you're doing is you're feeding those internal demons. That's what I call them. Alan calls them dragons. I call them internal demons. You're giving them strength and power. And then they're very creative at finding ways to trick you. Why? Because they are you.
Mm-hmm. Al, your thoughts, your charge?
I, as I was coming out of a lot of my issues, I found I needed a moral code. And serendipity, I was giving a talk at a Rotary, and a guy gave me one of the challenge coins, which had the 4-way test on the back of it. And I have found that is exactly what I needed. And is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Is it beneficial to all concerned? And when you live by that, the first thing you do as a veteran is you go, well, wait a minute, I'm feeling bad. Am I lying to myself? Am I lying to my spouse? Am I lying to my friends? Am I telling them how I really feel? Is doing what I'm going to do going to build a better friendship with my wife and my kids? Is it going to be beneficial to them, to my husband, my spouse, to my friends, my mom, my dad? So it's kind of like if we have a moral code and we live by that, even as a therapist, am I telling you the truth about yourself? They kept telling my dad when he had cancer that we can still treat it. They couldn't. They told my brother-in-law they could treat it. They couldn't. Be honest. Have a moral code. Live by that.
Outstanding. Thank you both. I know a virtual round of applause and gratitude for your service to the nation, your service now, your story, and just who you are as humans. I'm grateful to call you friends and appreciate this conversation. So Alan and Flo, thank you guys both so much. And Matt, I'll turn it back over to you to close this out. Thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation.